When a white officer stops a black judge at the courthouse, a single moment of prejudice ignites an unbelievable partnership that uncovers corruption, transforms a city, and proves justice can rise from the ashes of injustice. The sun was just beginning to dip below the skyline of Atlanta, casting long shadows across the marble steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. Judge Amara Winston adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase as she hurried toward the building. At 42, she was one of the youngest judges in Georgia history, a trailblazer whose sharp intellect and unwavering commitment to justice had earned her respect across the state. Her deep brown skin glistened faintly with perspiration from the humid evening air, and her tailored black blazer clung to her frame as she moved with purpose. Today had been a long one, hours spent presiding over a contentious custody case, but she'd stayed late to review files for an upcoming trial that weighed heavily on her mind. As she approached the side entrance, reserved for courthouse staff, Amara noticed a figure standing near the door. It was a young white police officer, no older than 25, his uniform crisp and his posture rigid. His name tag read, Officer T. Bennett. His blue eyes narrowed slightly as she drew closer, and Amara instinctively reached for the ID badge clipped to her blazer. She'd been through this routine countless times. Flashing her credentials to security personnel was second nature. But before she could even lift the badge into view, Officer Bennett stepped forward, his hand raised. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification," he said, his tone clipped and authoritative. His gaze flickered over her, lingering on her face, her attire, her very presence. Amara paused, her hand hovering near her badge. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "I'm Judge Amara Winston," she replied evenly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent years commanding courtrooms. "I work here." Bennett didn't flinch. If anything, his expression hardened. "I don't know who you are, ma'am. There's been a report of suspicious activity in the area, someone loitering near the courthouse. I need to see your ID, and I need you to step aside for questioning." The words hit Amara like a slap, though she didn't let it show. Suspicious activity? Loitering? She was standing on the doorstep of the courthouse she'd served in for nearly a decade. Her mind raced, piecing together the absurdity of the situation. She could feel the familiar sting of indignation rising in her chest, but she kept her composure. She'd learned long ago that reacting with anger only fueled the fire of ignorance. "Officer Bennett," she said, reading his name tag aloud, "this is my ID." She held up the badge, the gold lettering glinting faintly under the dim security light. "I'm due in my chambers to prepare for a case. I suggest you let me pass." Bennett's jaw tightened, and for a moment, it seemed he might double down. His hand hovered near his radio, as if debating whether to call for backup. But then, something shifted. His eyes darted to the badge, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He stepped back, though his posture remained stiff. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low. "Go ahead." Amara didn't linger. She brushed past him, her heels clicking against the pavement as she entered the building. The cool air of the courthouse washed over her, but it did little to soothe the heat simmering beneath her calm exterior. She'd faced prejudice before, countless times, in fact, but there was something about this encounter that felt different. Maybe it was the audacity of it happening here, at the very seat of justice she'd sworn to uphold. Or maybe it was the way Bennett's eyes had sized her up, as if her title, her accomplishments, her very existence were irrelevant. Inside her chambers, Amara dropped her briefcase onto the desk and sank into her chair. She stared at the framed photo on her desk, her late father, a civil rights attorney who'd fought tirelessly for equality. "What would you have done, Dad?" she murmured, tracing the edge of the frame with her finger. She could almost hear his voice, "Keep going, Amara. Don't let them dim your light." She exhaled, pushing the encounter to the back of her mind. There was work to do. The trial she was preparing for involved a young black entrepreneur, Jamal Carter, who'd been wrongfully accused of fraud by a powerful corporation. It was a case that mirrored her own experiences, assumptions made, opportunities denied, all because of the color of his skin. She'd vowed to give Jamal a fair shot at justice, and she wouldn't let Officer Bennett or anyone else derail her focus. But as she flipped open the case file, a knock sounded at her door. She looked up, surprised. It was late, most of the staff had gone home. "Come in," she called. The door creaked open, and to her shock, Officer Bennett stepped inside. His uniform was still pristine, but his demeanor had changed. His shoulders were slumped, and his eyes avoided hers. In his hands, he held a small notebook, its edges worn. "Judge Winston," he began, his voice quieter than before, I owe you an apology." Amara leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. She didn't speak, letting the silence stretch between them. Bennett shifted uncomfortably, then continued. "I didn't know who you were. I mean, I didn't believe you were a judge. And that's on me. I let my assumptions get the better of me, and I was wrong. I've been thinking about it since you walked away, and I couldn't just let it go without saying something." Amara studied him, searching for sincerity in his words. She'd heard apologies before, empty platitudes meant to smooth over discomfort. But there was something raw in Bennett's tone, a crack in his bravado that piqued her curiosity. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady. "What changed in the last 15 minutes? Bennett hesitated, then held up the notebook. "This," he said. "It's my dad's. He was a cop too, retired a few years back. He always told me to own my mistakes, no matter how hard it is. I messed up out there, and I'd be a coward if I didn't admit it." Amara's gaze softened slightly, though her guard remained up. "And what exactly do you think you messed up, Officer Bennett?" He swallowed hard. "I judged you before I knew you. I saw what I wanted to see, not what was there. And I'm sorry for that." The room fell silent again. Amara considered his words, weighing them against the countless times she'd been dismissed or underestimated. Part of her wanted to send him away, to tell him an apology didn't erase the sting of his actions. But another part, the part shaped by her father's belief in second chances, saw an opportunity. "Sit down," she said finally, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Bennett blinked, clearly caught off guard, but he obeyed. "I'm not here to lecture you," Amara began, leaning forward. "But I am going to tell you something. What happened out there? It's not just about me. It's about a system that's trained you to see people like me as threats first and humans second. I'm a judge, yes, but I'm also a black woman who's been stopped, questioned, and doubted more times than I can count. And tomorrow, I'm presiding over a case that's about the same thing, someone judged before they were known." Bennett listened, his hands clasped tightly around the notebook. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue. For the first time, he seemed to truly hear her. "I don't want your apology," Amara continued. "I want you to do better. Not just for me, but for everyone who walks through those doors. Can you do that?" Bennett nodded slowly, his expression resolute. "Yes, ma'am. I can try." "Good," Amara said, rising from her chair. "Then let's start now." She didn't know it yet, but that moment, those words, would set off a chain of events that neither she nor Bennett could have predicted. What happened next would be unbelievable, not just to them, but to the entire city of Atlanta. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with anticipation. Jamal Carter's trial was set to begin, and the gallery was packed with reporters, activists, and curious onlookers. Amara sat at the bench, her gavel resting beside her, her mind sharp despite the sleepless night she'd spent wrestling with Bennett's apology. She'd meant what she said, she didn't want empty words. She wanted action. But she hadn't expected Bennett to take her challenge so literally. As the bailiff called the court to order, Amara's eyes caught a familiar figure slipping into the back row. It was Bennett, out of uniform, dressed in a plain gray hoodie and jeans. He looked out of place among the suited attorneys and spectators, but his presence intrigued her. What was he doing here? The trial began with opening statements. The prosecution, representing the corporation, painted Jamal as a scheming opportunist who'd falsified documents to secure a lucrative contract. The defense countered with evidence of Jamal's integrity, a small business owner who'd built his tech startup from the ground up, only to be targeted by a rival company with deeper pockets and a history of racial bias. Amara listened intently, her years of experience honing her ability to sift truth from spin. But her attention kept drifting to Bennett. He wasn't just watching, he was taking notes, scribbling furiously in that worn notebook of his. During a recess, she beckoned the bailiff over. "Find out why Officer Bennett's here," she instructed quietly. Discreetly. The bailiff returned minutes later with an answer that surprised her. "He says he's here to learn, Your Honor. Says you told him to do better, and he figured this was a start." Amara raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected that. Most people would have let her words fade into the ether, a fleeting moment of guilt brushed aside by the next shift. But Bennett was different, or at least, he was trying to be. The trial stretched into the afternoon, with witnesses detailing the corporation's pattern of targeting minority-owned businesses. Jamal took the stand, his voice steady as he recounted the humiliation of being accused without evidence. Amara saw echoes of her own experience in his story, the weight of being judged before being known. She glanced at Bennett again. His pen had stopped moving, and his eyes were fixed on Jamal, wide with something that looked like realization. That evening, as Amara packed up her chambers, another knock came. She wasn't surprised to see Bennett again, though his expression was more determined this time. "Judge Winston," he said, stepping inside, "I've been thinking about what you said. About doing better. I sat in on the trial today, and I think I can help." Amara set down her briefcase, intrigued. "Help how?" Bennett hesitated, then pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This is a list of calls I've responded to in the last year, stops, detentions, arrests. I went through them last night after we talked. A lot of them, they're like what happened with you. People who didn't do anything wrong, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I didn't see it before, but I do now." Amara took the paper, scanning the handwritten notes. Dates, names, locations, dozens of incidents, meticulously recorded. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. "I want to testify," Bennett said, his voice firm. "Not just in this case, but in others. I've got records, logs, even body cam footage I can access. If the system's broken, like you said, maybe I can help fix it, from the inside." It was an offer Amara hadn't anticipated. A white police officer, barely out of the academy, volunteering to expose flaws in his own department. It sounded too good to be true, and yet, there was a fire in Bennett's eyes that told her he meant it. "This isn't a game," she warned. "You'd be putting your career on the line. Maybe more." "I know," Bennett replied. "But if I don't, I'm just part of the problem. My dad, he always said a cop's job is to protect, not to hurt. I've been doing it wrong. Let me make it right." Amara considered him for a long moment. It was a risk, but it was also a chance, one she'd spent her career fighting for. "All right," she said finally. "Meet me here tomorrow. We'll figure out how to do this." What neither of them knew was that their unlikely alliance was about to uncover a scandal far bigger than Jamal's case, a web of corruption that would shake the city to its core. Over the next week, Amara and Bennett worked in secret. She guided him through the legal implications of his testimony, while he dug through police records, piecing together a pattern of profiling that stretched beyond his own actions. What started as a personal reckoning for Bennett quickly ballooned into something explosive. Dispatch logs, incident reports, even internal emails, all pointed to a systemic issue within the Atlanta PD, where officers were incentivized to target certain communities to boost arrest numbers. Meanwhile, Jamal's trial reached a turning point. The defense called a surprise witness, Officer Bennett. The courtroom buzzed as he took the stand, no longer in his hoodie but in full uniform, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Amara maintained her impartiality, but inside, she felt a surge of pride. This was the doing better she'd demanded. Bennett's testimony was measured but damning. He recounted his encounter with Amara, admitting his mistake, then detailed similar incidents from his records. "I was trained to see threats where there weren't any," he said, his voice steady. "And I wasn't the only one. It's not just me, it's the system." The prosecution objected, arguing relevance, but Amara overruled. "The witness is establishing a pattern," she said firmly. "Continue." By the time Bennett stepped down, the jury was visibly shaken. The defense rested, and deliberations began. But outside the courtroom, the fallout was immediate. News outlets seized on Bennett's testimony, dubbing him the whistleblower cop. Protests erupted outside the precinct, demanding accountability. And within the PD, whispers of retaliation began to swirl. Late that night, Amara found Bennett waiting in her chambers, his face pale. "They're suspending me," he said. "Pending an investigation. My sergeant says I've betrayed the badge." Amara set down her pen, her expression softening. "You knew this might happen. Why didn't you back out?" Bennett shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Because you were right. It's bigger than me. And if I stop now, what's the point?" Before Amara could respond, her phone buzzed. It was her clerk, the jury's back. The verdict came swiftly, not guilty. Jamal Carter was free, his reputation restored. The courtroom erupted in cheers, but Amara's eyes found Bennett's across the room. This was just the beginning. Hours later, a bombshell dropped. An anonymous source, later revealed to be a fellow officer inspired by Bennett, leaked documents showing the PD had falsified reports to secure federal funding. The scandal implicated dozens of officers, including high-ranking officials. Amara realized their alliance had sparked a reckoning she'd never imagined. Months later, Atlanta was a city transformed. The scandal led to sweeping reforms, new training protocols, civilian oversight boards, and the resignation of the police chief. Jamal Carter's startup thrived, and he credited Amara and Bennett in a viral TED Talk that inspired millions. Amara stood on the courthouse steps, now a symbol of change, as Bennett received a civilian commendation for his courage. He'd left the force, choosing instead to work with youth in underserved communities, teaching them their rights. Their unlikely partnership had become a beacon of hope, a white officer and a black judge, united against injustice. At the ceremony, Bennett approached Amara, holding his father's notebook. "I added a new page," he said, handing it to her. Inside was a single line, "To Judge Winston, thank you for showing me the way." Amara smiled, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Keep going," she whispered to herself. Together, they had, and the world was better for it.